If you've been keeping up with the marketing for Marvel's Spider-Man 2, then you'll probably have its tagline of "Be greater together" burrowed firmly into your brain. It's a fitting summary for the Insomniac Games developed sequel, which I'm happy to confirm is bigger, better, and more bombastic than its predecessor in pretty much every single way. But apart from it also being a clever play on words regarding the Peter-Miles symbiote trifecta, it also intimates the nuances of an immaculately crafted narrative, which turns out to be a prescient post-pandemic treatise on work-life balance, trauma, and coming of age. So many of us are constantly striving to be greater in our own lives, whether that's in being greater at our jobs, being greater at looking after ourselves, or just being greater people in general. But what does being greater actually look like? Is it something we achieve by being stronger and more resilient in a difficult world? Or are we greater when we achieve a stated career goal? Perhaps we find greatness by putting our own needs aside for someone else. As Marvel's Spider-Man 2 deconstructs, being greater isn't always so simple, and striving to be the better version of yourself can either lead to genuine introspective improvement, or, like Peter Parker, leave you with a symbiote of self-destruction. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 has been a long time in the making. It's been 5 years since Marvel's Spider-Man left us with that fateful shot of Harry Osborn suspended in that green tank with the symbiote, and after providing a lovely stopgap with 2020's Miles Morales spin-off, anticipation for the full-fledged sequel has been riding high. I have to concede that I'd almost been taking Marvel's Spider-Man 2 for granted before its release though. Sporadic trailers and gameplay showings had looked strong, but given the already high bar set by Insomniac in 2018, I wasn't sure just how much of a ceiling was left for the studio to swing/crawl/web wing its way to. Well, it turns out there was a lot, because Insomniac reaches a storytelling and presentation peak pretty much from the beginning of Marvel's Spider-Man 2 and maintains that level for the remainder of the game's main story. The end result is something that not only illustrates the studio's erudite grasp on the Marvel mythos in a way that transcends much of the Wallcrawler's recent comics history, but also serves as a true showcase for the PlayStation 5. That same familiar open-world Spider-Man core is preserved, but with added gameplay flourishes that reinvigorate combat, traversal, and stealth, much the same way Rocksteady did when the studio made the jump between Batman Arkham Asylum and Arkham City in 2011, which was a landmark sequel in the superhero genre of games. There are some disappointing criticisms to level at the lack of open-world improvements, which become particularly pronounced once the main story's credits come to a close, but make no mistake. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is a rich, moving, and exhilarating effort from Insomniac, a feat that's made even starker given the general level of Disney-produced superhero fatigue and burnout that's blighted the genre over the last few years. If we're pinpointing reasons why Marvel's Spider-Man 2 succeeds where other superhero fiction is currently failing, then we have to start with the story. Insomniac's sequel starts with Peter and Miles, both fully fledged Spider-Men, but struggling to make their double lives work. Miles is having a hard time writing his university application because he's so invested in being Spider-Man, both as a noble cause but also as a distraction, while Peter is failing to move on from Aunt May's death and find a job his web-slinging won't bounce him straight out of. Challenging questions are further posed by the emergence of the vicious Kraven the Hunter, who comes to New York in search of the ultimate prey, as well as the return of childhood amigo Harry Osborn. Oh, and there's the symbiote too, which exacerbates all of the aforementioned and leads to some of the most emotionally raw moments we've had from the series yet. While I obviously won't be getting into the how and why that happens in this review for the sake of keeping everything spoiler-free, I would hate to ruin anything for you, what I will say is that the story of Marvel's Spider-Man 2 really delves deep into that old credo of great responsibility accompanying great power, and what happens when that responsibility ultimately overwhelms and becomes a negative influence. This narrative crux sustains the game from start to end, interrogating Uncle Ben's famous words, and in a way that draws a through line between this game and the recent Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, challenges what it means to be Spider-Man. How many times have we had to see Peter or Miles suffer personal cost by being a superhero? It's an accepted, tragic element of the entire Spidey identity, but what Marvel's Spider-Man 2 does so well is that it upsets that status quo. Is Peter and Miles' commitment to being the best Spider-Man ever an achievable or even healthy goal? Or does having such a goal hurt both their personal orbit and the New Yorkers they're trying to protect. Balance in all its myriad forms is very much the main theme here. A theme Insomniac deftly weaves into a story that also broaches trauma, loss, and what moving on actually looks like. It's deeply, sometimes exhaustingly affecting, particularly for a 20-something reviewer whose life has strangely aligned with Insomniac's Peter since 2018, but there's also plenty of excitement, fun, and humor to keep things from getting too morose as well. There are some truly magnificent swings Insomniac takes with the story as it reimagines the Black Costume saga, and while I'm not usually one to reach for superlatives like this, believe me when I say that none of you are ready for what this game has up its web shooters. It's that good. Which brings us to gameplay. Marvel Spider-Man 2 brings a bevy of new toys for players to spice up traversal, combat, and stealth this time around, along with 2 new boroughs to explore in Queens and Brooklyn, refining what worked in Insomniac's previous 2 Spider-Man games and excising the stuff that mostly didn't. Gadgets, for instance, have been completely dialed back this time around. As opposed to the first game's Iron Man-esque weapons locker, players will instead have just several gadgets to deploy in combat. This lessens the overall amount of noise on the screen and also prevents gadget spam from overcoming each encounter. Reducing the number of gadgets available also places greater emphasis on the new abilities section and on Peter and Miles' respective skill trees, with certain abilities adding fresh wrinkles to experiment with in certain combat scenarios. For instance, while you can still hold triangle to web throw a given target into a piece of scenery, you can also unlock abilities that enable you to swing your chosen enemy left or right, or bring them up in the air and slam them back down to the ground. This might seem insignificant in isolation, but smaller changes like these are emblematic of the new approach to combat in Marvel Spider-Man 2, which forces you to think more carefully about how you tackle given enemy types, rather than just brute forcing your way through each battle with an army of Spider-Bots. Way more noteworthy than the unlockable skills are the abilities themselves, which also evolve over the course of Marvel Spider-Man 2. When you start the game, you'll have Peter's new mechanical arms to integrate into combat, while Miles will have his typical selection of Venom Blasts. Both of these skill sets change over time and in new and exciting ways, enhancing traversal as well as stealth and combat, but the most pronounced change is obviously the symbiote. Pete's new threads are a blast to use in combat and come with abilities that excel at both dealing damage to enemy groups en masse and to those unfortunate guys you just fancy doing a Daredevil Born Again to. The suit also comes with its own God of War style rage mode, which can insta-KO smaller enemies and make mincemeat of the bulkier ones too. This can prove particularly handy if you've had a hard time getting your parries right against some of the new enemy types, no judgment, or just fancy expediting a certain boss fight. Of course, it's not just the 2 Spider-Men who have seen upgrades to Marvel Spider-Man 2. Enemies have also gotten in on the act this time, with Insomniac introducing new brute and weapon-focused enemy types that can really cause a headache if you aren't being careful. Certain enemies in Kraven's faction will make full use of a given space's verticality, firing arrows, nets, and grenades your way while pinging between surfaces. Attacks from some of these new enemies also need to be parried rather than dodged, an adjustment that did admittedly take some getting used to, particularly with the parry symbol being similar to the generic Spidey Sense one, but once those old habits died hard, I was integrating parries, wall bounces, gadgets, and abilities seamlessly together in a way that made combat one gorgeous ballet of carnage. Said ballet of carnage also applies to the boss fights in Marvel Spider-Man 2, and I must say I'm particularly impressed with how Insomniac continues to seamlessly apply core gameplay tenets to the series' big bads. This aspect was already a highlight of Marvel Spider-Man and Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, but it's taken to a whole other level here. Boss fights feel more elaborate, epic, and intuitive than before, and each will react to your gadgets, abilities, and combos in their own unique ways. There are some all-timer confrontations here, one of which comes right at the very beginning, but all of them are really strong, whether it's the epic multi-sequence chases that force you to employ new features like web wings, or those boss battles that are restricted to just the one location. Unfortunately, not every facet of Marvel Spider-Man 2 is so superlative worthy. While it's very much an exemplary sequel, there are certain aspects of its potential that feel frustratingly unrealized. The biggest of which is the open world itself. Insomniac has given players 2 new expansive areas to explore in Marvel Spider-Man 2, bringing Peter Parker's childhood stomping ground of Queens to a Marvel game for the first time since 2005's Ultimate Spider-Man, as well as Brooklyn, which houses Miles' school, Brooklyn Visions Academy. Manhattan is of course back as well, and while all 3 of these areas are beautiful to swing by and web-wing through, there's scarcely little to hold your attention there. One of the best things about Marvel's Spider-Man was how it utilized Manhattan as a vehicle for exposition and character development. Landmarks guided your eye to Marvel monuments and real-life locations, while backpacks provided neat little character moments that fleshed out Peter's past. Marvel Spider-Man 2, however, has comparatively little in that department. In the place of backpacks, we now have photo opportunities, with Peter and Miles making spare cash for the Daily Bugle by sending in snaps of quirky or otherwise heartwarming NYC moments. These are pleasant in and of themselves, but they're a disappointing follow-up to the lore blowout we got in the previous 2 games. There's just not much that feels as Marvel-y about New York this time. Something that jars especially given so many of the side missions here could have been better served by a cameo or 2, along the lines of what we've seen in the likes of Ultimate Spider-Man or 2008's Web of Shadows. There are tangible connections to the Marvel Universe in the game, and obviously I'm not asking for Spidey's story to be taken away from him and for it to obnoxiously defer to tedious MCU-style storytelling methods, but given how little there is to do in the world and how high the stakes get in the story, New York can feel bizarrely ordinary. Side missions at least fare better than collectibles this time, particularly the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man app requests, as well as those that make use of actual Spider-Man villains like Mysterio. But still, it's disappointing to see Insomniac defer to familiar structures for a lot of them. Kraven's Hunter Blinds serve essentially the same function as the Kingpin's construction zones from Marvel Spider-Man, where you have to take down set pockets of enemies holed up in various locations. Other side missions, like the Hunter drones Miles has to take down, also follow the same pattern in each encounter, while crimes in progress haven't really received that great a shakeup either. While not enough to take the shine off the whole experience, it is unfortunate that Insomniac hasn't been able to crack this big, repetitive Mysterio fishbowl after the previous 2 titles faced similar criticism. But despite some open-world disappointments, my 22 hours spent bringing my first playthrough of Marvel Spider-Man 2 to completion was largely a total blast. If Insomniac's last few PlayStation exclusives hadn't already cemented the studio at the forefront of the industry, then its latest effort surely must. It is an assured, epic step forward that leverages all the pathos and adventure of Marvel's comics without getting mired in the tendrils of nostalgia, in turn delivering one of the most compelling and epic Spidey gaming adventures of all time. There are some frustrating oversights away from the main story, but Marvel Spider-Man 2 can still happily take its place as one of the best PS5 exclusives released thus far. That's why I'm giving it 4.5 stars. And that was our review of Marvel Spider-Man 2. Let me know how excited you are for the game down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please give us a like and also subscribe to WhatCulture Gaming, as we'll have more Marvel Spider-Man 2 content coming up once the game launches. Either way, thank you all for watching. I've been Ewan, this has been WhatCulture Gaming, and I'll hopefully whip you next time. Bye!